I don't step back for anyone. The words slipped out before I even realized I had spoken them, echoing in the grand ballroom where crystal chandeliers cast fractured light over polished marble floors. Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows outside, each droplet catching the glow like tiny fireworks exploding in slow motion. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted the silver tray laden with flutes of champagne, balancing carefully as I navigated between clusters of Manhattan's elite, their laughter and soft music fading into a blur around me. At 24, working 3 jobs to pay for nursing school, I had seen my share of wealthy clients, but nothing had prepared me for the presence that suddenly filled the room like a storm about to break. Alexander Romano appeared near the terrace doors, tall and impossibly poised, his dark hair slicked back, suit perfectly tailored, exuding control that made the air itself seem to bend toward him. My breath hitched as his storm blue eyes found mine across the room, and something deeper than fear crawled up my spine, a recognition that he was not just another powerful man, but someone who could see through pretense, someone who could read hesitation like an open book. I froze mid-step, nearly dropping the tray, and in that instant, the ballroom's chaos dimmed into a single, electrifying focus. Alexander's gaze sharpened, not in anger, but with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. He took a deliberate step closer, the echo of his expensive shoes against marble amplifying each movement, and I realized my usual instinct to shrink, to blend in, was irrelevant here. My jaw tightened, and I straightened my posture, refusing to yield to the unspoken command in his presence. The subtle scent of his cologne drifted through the air, mixing with the faint tang of rain from the open terrace doors, and I felt the gravity of the moment weigh on me. Every eye that could see us had already turned elsewhere, as if acknowledging that this was not a scene for mere observation. I adjusted the tray once more, fingers gripping the crystal stems tightly, and whispered under my breath, "I don't step back for anyone," fully aware that this declaration would have no effect beyond my own defiance, yet it grounded me. Alexander paused, tilting his head slightly, a faint, almost imperceptible smile brushing his lips, the kind that suggested recognition, appraisal, and perhaps the beginning of understanding. The subtle tension between us pulsed through the air like electricity in a storm, an unspoken dialogue that carried more weight than words ever could, and for a heartbeat, I felt that the entire ballroom, the glittering chandeliers, the soft string quartet, all of it had condensed into this collision of wills. Every instinct I had trained to navigate polite society and treacherous floors of upscale events told me to retreat, to follow protocol, but I remained rooted, caught in the rhythm of the moment, aware that my choice to stand tall, to claim space, had shifted the balance, however subtly. Alexander's smile deepened just enough to be noticed by no one but me, and I felt a curious mixture of apprehension and acknowledgment. I took a careful step forward, not away, letting the tray sway slightly with the motion, and our eyes locked, each measuring the other, each learning in silence, the air between us taut with the promise that nothing would proceed as expected, and yet the world continued its indifferent hum around the edges, leaving only this suspended moment where defiance and power intertwined, and the night was just beginning to unfold. The hum of conversation and the clink of glass seemed distant now, a soft background to the sharp rhythm of my own heartbeat as I guided the tray past the terrace. Every step measured, every breath deliberate, I felt the weight of Alexander's eyes following me like a shadow that refused to retreat. My green eyes flicked briefly to him, noticing the subtle shift in his posture, the slight tilt of his head that suggested observation rather than command, calculation rather than threat. The air between us carried a charge I could almost see, like static gathering in the calm before a summer storm. I moved through the crowd, aware of every gaze, every whisper, though most did not linger on me. The most important eyes were on the other side of the room. The polished marble reflected the light from the chandeliers in sharp patterns, casting fractured glimmers across my path, and each reflection reminded me that I was in a space where appearances mattered, but substance was revealed in small, decisive moments. A waiter jostled the edge of my tray, and I steadied it with practiced precision, feeling the delicate weight of crystal under my fingertips, a small anchor of control in the midst of the chaos. Alexander took another step forward, his movement smooth, deliberate, not alarming, yet it drew me into awareness, each motion a subtle assertion of presence, a quiet test of boundaries. I met his gaze squarely, letting no tremor betray my inner calculation, and in that exchange, a silent dialogue unfolded, full of unspoken rules, respect demanded and measured. The orchestra of soft laughter, silverware, and soft strings played on, but my senses filtered to the moment alone between us. I adjusted the tray again, feeling the slight shift of weight as I navigated around a cluster of guests, each step a negotiation of space and attention, and through it, I realized the odd comfort in small mastery. A minor mishap at a nearby table caught Alexander's glance, and for the briefest moment, the faintest crease appeared at the corner of his mouth, a smile almost imperceptible, acknowledging the awareness, the presence, perhaps even the persistence in me that he recognized. I shifted slightly, moving closer to the edge of the terrace for a moment of clarity, the scent of rain mingling with the indoor air, and felt the pulse of energy between us intensify, an invisible thread of mutual calculation and curiosity. My mind raced through the steps I needed to take, the flow of service, the social dance, yet beneath the focus on tasks, I remained acutely attuned to him, to the subtle signals, the nuanced assessments that passed silently. Every careful motion of the tray, every controlled gesture of my hands, became a testament to composure and patience, a display of resilience and awareness that seemed to ripple through the space, noticed only by the man who mattered in this moment. Alexander moved slightly to the side, letting the space remain between us, yet the tension, the quiet acknowledgment of parity, hung in the air. I caught the glimmer of light off the cuff of his sleeve, the faint reflection in his storm blue eyes that hinted at calculation and evaluation, and I realized that this interaction, brief and measured as it was, had already shifted the balance, quietly establishing a respect unspoken, a power recognized without assertion. I took a final step, placing the tray securely on the nearest table, hand steady, heart aware, and felt the energy settle for a heartbeat, the dance of glance and movement continuing in the charged silence that was ours alone in the middle of the crowded, glittering room. The soft murmur of conversations returned as I stepped away from the table, my movements deliberate, calculating each turn of my heels on the polished marble. Alexander remained near the terrace, a silent figure of measured presence, observing without intruding, his storm blue eyes following each careful motion I made. The chandeliers above reflected in the glass doors, scattering light across the floor like liquid gold, and I felt the contrast between the opulent surroundings and the steady calm I maintained at the center of it. Every gesture of mine was intentional, a quiet declaration of control and competence, the tray in my hands both a tool and a shield, grounding me in a rhythm I could command even as the energy between us hummed like a taut string. A nearby waiter nudged a chair into the path, and I adjusted smoothly, never breaking eye contact with the direction of Alexander's gaze, sensing his subtle shift, the tilt of his head as if acknowledging the resolve I had cultivated over countless nights of balancing responsibility and expectation. The soft notes of the string quartet swelled, and the gentle laughter of the gala guests faded to a distant hum, leaving only the silent dialogue carried in glances and posture, the unspoken communication of mutual evaluation. I moved toward a corner table, setting down the flutes of champagne with precision, fingertips brushing the crystal lightly, a tactile affirmation of focus and poise. Alexander's subtle step forward, a measured advance that was neither threatening nor demanding, aligned with the cadence of my own awareness, creating an unspoken harmony, a tension held in perfect balance between authority and defiance. I straightened my back, inhaling slowly, noting the faint scent of rain carried through the terrace doors mingling with the warm fragrance of the gala, and felt the pulse of anticipation thread through the space, tangible, electric. Each subtle shift in the room, each ripple of movement, reinforced the delicate choreography unfolding between us, the negotiation of respect and acknowledgment. I caught the glint of light on his cufflink, the reflection in his storm blue eyes that seemed to measure and weigh each nuanced expression, and I knew that this encounter, though brief and seamless in outward motion, was an intricate dance of power, perception, and awareness. Moving past a group of guests, I maintained composure, letting the quiet gravity of my presence speak where words would falter, and sensed Alexander's attention follow, unwavering, his respect unspoken but palpable, a recognition of the steadiness and dignity I projected without fanfare. The air around us seemed charged, not with tension that demanded confrontation, but with the quiet electricity of two wills acknowledging one another, measuring, learning, and silently understanding the influence of integrity and resolve in a room otherwise dominated by surface and spectacle. I adjusted the tray for the last time, hand steady, pulse even, feeling the subtle affirmation of our shared space, a recognition that the balance had shifted slightly, a small but significant assertion that in this brief moment, presence, confidence, and composure held weight as tangible as any spoken command, and the room, the chandeliers, the distant laughter, all became peripheral to the silent, deliberate connection that had formed and would continue to unfold with careful, deliberate precision. I moved toward the edge of the terrace once more, letting the soft hum of the gala fade further into the background, each footstep deliberate on the gleaming marble, every careful shift of the tray a small testament to control and attention. Alexander remained still, his posture relaxed yet commanding, storm-blue eyes fixed on my every motion, reading subtle signals, gauging intent, and assessing composure with a precision that left no room for error. The light from the chandeliers caught the angles of his sharp features, highlighting the structured elegance of his face and the quiet intensity that radiated from him, a presence that was impossible to ignore. A breeze carried the scent of rain through the slightly open terrace doors, brushing against my hair, and I adjusted my grip on the tray, aware of the delicate balance of glass and the weight of perception that came with every step. I paused briefly, letting the tray rest on the edge of the serving table, and in that stillness, the room seemed to shrink, leaving only the taut thread of awareness stretched between us. Alexander inclined his head slightly, the faintest acknowledgment, a subtle recognition of poise and restraint that spoke louder than words ever could. I exhaled softly, feeling the rhythm of the room settle into a pattern dictated not by the crowd, the music, or the lighting, but by the silent negotiation of presence and respect that had formed between us. Each movement I made was purposeful, a statement of steadiness, an assertion of personal integrity that required no declaration, only attention to detail, measured pacing, and awareness of surroundings. The reflection of the chandeliers in the glass behind him created a haloed effect, casting a soft glow that illuminated the space between us, turning the shared tension into a visible thread of energy. I took a careful step back, then forward again, testing boundaries, noting how his gaze shifted in response, and realized that the dance of observation and subtle assertion had become a language of its own. The faint echo of laughter, the soft clinking of silverware, and the distant strains of the string quartet receded entirely as I focused on the delicate interplay, every glance, every tilt of the head, a wordless conversation that mapped out respect, calculation, and mutual recognition. I adjusted the tray one final time, letting the soft weight rest evenly across my palms. Feeling grounded, aware, and capable, while Alexander maintained his watchful stillness, a steady presence that neither intruded nor withdrew, affirming the balance that had quietly shifted. In that moment, the opulence of the gala, the polished floors, and the glittering chandeliers became a backdrop, the significance of which was measured not in spectacle but in the careful, deliberate acknowledgment of competence, integrity, and quiet resilience that connected us across the room, unspoken yet profoundly understood. The soft lighting of the ballroom shifted as the evening deepened, and I felt the gentle pull of awareness, Alexander's presence moving through the space like a subtle current that never touched yet influenced everything around it. I guided the tray past a gathering near the center, hand steady, green eyes alert to the patterns of movement and the play of light on crystal, and felt a curious tension, a rhythm that existed only because he remained a constant, silent observer. The scent of rain drifting in from the terrace mingled with the faint aroma of polished wood and aged wine, creating an atmosphere both electric and intimate, a backdrop for the silent dialogue unfolding between us. Each careful step I took was measured against the subtle indicators of his attention, the tilt of his head, the slightest narrowing of his eyes, and I realized that the unspoken exchange was a language, one where poise, precision, and awareness spoke more profoundly than any words. A server brushed past with a covered dish, and I adjusted my stance slightly, letting the tray sway minimally in a controlled rhythm, and Alexander's gaze followed, attentive but non-intrusive, as if noting mastery in motion and respect for space. The soft murmur of conversations, the distant notes of the string quartet, and the occasional laugh became peripheral, filtered out by the intensity of shared focus and the quiet recognition of competence and composure. I paused near a cluster of guests discussing upcoming philanthropic efforts, the room alive with polished decorum, and allowed a faint, controlled smile to soften my features, a subtle acknowledgment of presence without concession, knowing he noted each detail with exacting precision. Alexander shifted his weight, a quiet gesture that suggested awareness and subtle approval, a recognition that this moment was more than protocol, more than service, it was an assertion of balance, of dignity maintained within a realm built on appearances and expectations. I allowed my gaze to meet his briefly, holding it just long enough to convey awareness and steady confidence, feeling the thread of silent communication tighten and pulse with quiet energy, the tension neither confrontational nor absent, merely present, suspended in deliberate equilibrium. The reflections of the chandeliers on polished surfaces fractured into patterns of light that seemed to echo the rhythm of the room and the interaction between us, a visual symphony of poise and assessment, awareness and restraint. Each careful motion of the tray, each controlled breath, and each nuanced glance contributed to a dialogue of subtle power, an interplay of respect and evaluation, and as I moved toward the far side of the terrace, I realized that every moment, every calculated gesture, had quietly shifted the balance, establishing an unspoken understanding, a recognition that composure, presence, and deliberate action carried weight and influence in a space otherwise dominated by spectacle and expectation, and Alexander's continued watchfulness affirmed that the silent, deliberate connection between us had not only formed but thrived, quietly commanding attention and respect in a world built on appearances. The ballroom seemed to narrow around me as I moved toward the refreshment table, every step deliberate, my hand steady despite the subtle quiver in my chest from the constant awareness of Alexander's gaze. The soft hum of conversation, the gentle clinking of glasses, and the distant string quartet became a muted background, leaving only the sharp focus of observation and recognition that pulsed between us. I poured a glass of sparkling water with careful precision, feeling the cool condensation seep into my fingertips, and adjusted my stance to maintain balance, aware of the way light reflected off the polished marble floors, scattering in fractured patterns that seemed to mirror the delicate tension suspended in the air. Alexander took a measured step closer, his movement silent yet impossible to ignore, and I felt the subtle shift of energy as our unspoken dialogue continued, a conversation carried entirely by posture, glance, and the minute choreography of awareness. The soft scent of rain mingled with the faint aroma of polished wood and the muted fragrance of wine, creating an atmosphere that was both serene and electric, as if the room itself acknowledged the quiet negotiation unfolding in its midst. I allowed my eyes to meet his briefly, holding the gaze without wavering, feeling a subtle acknowledgment pass between us, a recognition of composure, awareness, and presence. Each motion I made, from the gentle tilt of the glass to the measured shift of my weight, became a declaration of steadiness and confidence, a silent assertion that spoke more loudly than any words ever could. Alexander's eyes followed, assessing without intrusion, noting the minute details of my posture and gesture, and I felt a calm clarity in the knowledge that this silent communication established a subtle balance, a mutual respect grounded in observation and understanding. The reflections of the chandeliers in the glass doors fractured the light into small, moving prisms, catching the corners of the room in a glimmer that danced across the polished surfaces, yet the attention between us remained undisturbed, concentrated, quietly charged. I took a small step back, adjusting the tray one final time, letting the movement be smooth, unbroken, deliberate, and I noticed Alexander's slight incline of his head, a faint acknowledgement, almost imperceptible, but enough to register the measured power of the moment. The surrounding guests moved through the ballroom, laughing and conversing, unaware of the subtle tension threading the space between us, the invisible current of awareness and respect that connected two people in the midst of opulence, observation, and deliberate poise. Every element of the environment, the glimmering chandeliers, the polished marble, the soft fragrance of the gala, and the muted patter of rain outside, contributed to the rhythm of this unspoken exchange, each breath, glance, and step adding to the dialogue of presence, balance, and silent understanding. I felt grounded, aware, and capable, carrying the tray with a quiet authority, the energy between us resonating like a low hum, a thread of deliberate engagement that neither intruded nor withdrew, establishing a presence defined by integrity, observation, and quiet, unwavering attention. The subtle shift in Alexander's expression caught my attention before I even realized he had moved closer, the storm blue depth of his eyes softening with a faint warmth that was entirely unspoken yet impossible to miss. The room around us remained a blur of movement and light, guests laughing softly, chandeliers reflecting fractured golden patterns across the polished marble, but our focus was entirely contained in the delicate tension suspended between us. I adjusted my posture, standing a fraction taller, the tray in my hand serving as both shield and anchor, feeling the weight of deliberate presence as a statement of composure. Alexander's gaze traced each calculated motion I made, noting the subtle shift in balance, the precision with which I moved, and for the first time, the faintest acknowledgement of approval hovered on the edge of his expression, unspoken yet profoundly felt. I felt a rush of awareness, a recognition that the silent dialogue we had been navigating was evolving, the exchange of energy between us shifting from mere observation to a tentative understanding. The faint fragrance of rain from the terrace mingled with the muted aroma of polished wood and aged wine, creating a layered atmosphere that grounded the room while amplifying the focus of our interaction. I stepped lightly to the side, allowing a subtle opening in the space between us, and Alexander mirrored the adjustment, his presence deliberate, non-intrusive, a silent partner in this measured dance of recognition and respect. My eyes flicked briefly to the scattered reflections on the marble, noting how each shimmer of light paralleled the quiet pulse of awareness threading the air between us, a rhythm that seemed to echo with intent and balance. Each gesture, each minute adjustment of grip or stance, became a component of an unspoken language, a communication conveyed entirely through presence and poise, amplified by the elegance of the surroundings and the precision of observation. Alexander's slight tilt of the head, the subtle narrowing of his eyes, and the faint curve of his mouth all contributed to a silent assessment, and I responded instinctively, maintaining a calm, steady demeanor that reinforced the integrity of the exchange. The hum of the orchestra, the soft murmur of conversation, and the gentle clinking of glasses all faded to peripheral awareness, leaving only the charged atmosphere of connection, respect, and recognition that had quietly formed. I took a careful step back, maintaining eye contact, letting the tray rest lightly at my side, and in that moment, the subtle acknowledgment in Alexander's expression confirmed that our silent engagement had shifted the balance, creating a shared understanding defined not by words but by presence, observation, and deliberate poise. The air between us felt taut, alive with anticipation, a measured energy that spoke to the complexity of awareness and the quiet, compelling power of integrity, and as I exhaled softly, I realized that this silent negotiation, carried entirely through posture, glance, and unspoken acknowledgement, had become a defining moment, a pause in time where mutual recognition and subtle influence held more weight than anything that could be expressed aloud. The soft glow of chandeliers stretched across the ballroom, casting long reflections on the polished marble floors, and I felt the subtle charge of energy between us intensify as Alexander stepped slightly closer, the faintest shift of his stance signaling a quiet acknowledgement of the presence I maintained. The string quartet's notes floated gently through the air, mixing with the muted murmur of conversations and the occasional clink of crystal, creating a backdrop that felt both serene and electric, a world in which every movement and glance carried weight beyond words. I adjusted the tray in my hands, feeling the smooth glass against my fingertips, and let a small, controlled smile soften my expression, aware that he noticed, his storm blue eyes flicking with an intensity that measured and assessed without intrusion. The air between us seemed to thrum, a subtle current that neither demanded nor retreated, only existed as a tangible acknowledgement of competence, poise, and deliberate awareness. I took a step toward the edge of the terrace, letting the soft scent of rain drift in, mingling with the faint aroma of polished wood and the muted fragrance of wine, grounding the moment in sensory clarity that heightened the unspoken dialogue unfolding in the space between us. Alexander's gaze followed each subtle motion, noting the nuanced shifts of balance, the measured grace of every gesture, and I felt a quiet affirmation in the knowledge that this silent exchange had created a space of mutual recognition and respect. A waiter passed nearby, and I adjusted my posture, allowing the tray to sway just enough to demonstrate control without faltering, the action observed and acknowledged in the briefest of glances. The reflections on the marble fractured into a pattern of shifting light that echoed the rhythm of our interaction, each flicker mirroring the cadence of awareness and careful negotiation that defined the moment. I moved smoothly, deliberately, every step measured against the careful watch of Alexander's presence, sensing the subtle shift in his posture, the slight ease that suggested an internal acknowledgement of the balance we had cultivated. The hum of the ballroom, the soft clatter of dishes, and the gentle laughter receded further into the periphery, leaving the charged space between us as the central focus, a delicate interplay of awareness, integrity, and composure. I allowed my gaze to linger briefly on his, holding it with calm confidence, feeling the unspoken acknowledgement of competence and steady resolve pass between us, a shared understanding that carried the weight of silent respect and measured power. Every movement, every careful breath, and every micro-adjustment of stance and grip contributed to this quiet yet potent dialogue, establishing a connection grounded in observation, awareness, and deliberate poise. The balance between us felt taut, electric yet steady, an invisible thread woven from attention, recognition, and silent communication, and I realized that in the midst of opulence, light, and sound, the most profound interaction was the one conducted entirely without words, carried in presence, gaze, and subtle, deliberate motion, leaving a tension that promised continued engagement and quiet discovery. The chandeliers above seemed to pulse softly as the evening wore on, their fractured light stretching across the polished marble and casting gentle, fleeting patterns that shifted with every subtle movement in the room. I stood near the terrace doors, tray now empty, fingertips lightly brushing the edges as if to measure the balance of my own presence, and I felt the quiet gravity of the space settle into something intimate yet expansive, a rhythm defined entirely by awareness and subtle observation. Alexander's eyes tracked me with an almost imperceptible nod, a hint of recognition and approval that spoke volumes in the absence of words. The storm blue intensity softened just enough to convey understanding and silent acknowledgment. The faint scent of rain carried in from the terrace mingled with the warm, muted fragrances of polished wood and fine wine, creating an atmosphere that was at once calming and electric, anchoring the room while emphasizing the charged stillness of our exchange. I took a slow step forward, allowing the movement to be deliberate and precise, each shift in weight, each tilt of the head, a quiet declaration of confidence and controlled presence. Alexander mirrored my motion subtly, the faintest adjustment in stance, a silent agreement that the space between us had been defined not by proximity alone but by the deliberate pacing, awareness, and poise that we each maintained. The soft hum of conversation and the distant notes of the string quartet receded into the periphery, leaving only the electric tension of mutual recognition, the silent dialogue carried entirely through posture, gaze, and nuanced motion. I allowed my eyes to meet his once more, holding the contact long enough to convey measured assurance, subtle strength, and the assertion of presence without challenge, feeling the invisible thread between us tighten in acknowledgment of composure and deliberate restraint. Every breath, every micro-adjustment, every nuanced movement of my hands and stance reinforced the balance, a shared understanding that had formed through hours of observation, calculation, and silent exchange. The reflections of the chandeliers fractured the light further across the floor, creating small constellations that echoed the rhythm of the unspoken communication, each glimmer reinforcing the delicacy and intensity of the moment. I moved toward the center of the terrace, just far enough to maintain the perfect space between us, the energy between our movements communicating as clearly as spoken words ever could, an intricate balance of respect, awareness, and subtle influence. Alexander's slight tilt of the head and softening expression conveyed a tacit acknowledgment of presence, an understanding that each careful motion I made was measured and intentional, that the strength in my poise resonated quietly but powerfully across the space. The ballroom continued its gentle hum of life around us, yet the charged air between us remained a singular focus, an electric current of mutual recognition, silent respect, and deliberate awareness, and I realized that this delicate equilibrium, established through observation, composure, and unwavering attention, was a moment suspended in time, a quiet affirmation that presence, poise, and subtle influence could command more weight than words, leaving an open promise of continued interaction, discovery, and silent understanding as the evening unfolded.